So why do you think people are drawn to media that centers around like superheroes, action heroes, and just like heroes in general? And like, is there any specific appeal to them?
Escapism. People want to forget about reality for a while. If you've got a horrible job, or if you've got family that are ill, or something like that, and you allow yourself 2 or 3 hours to go and forget about it, what people like to see is action. They like to see special effects. They like to see uplifting stories, and stories that have a redemptive arc where somebody that is clearly bad by the end of the story they've either been got rid of or they have changed their ways. So I think it is the old trope of people want to forget about their life for a couple of hours. And if you've got Batman, Superman, Justice League, whoever, that's so far removed from what they have to deal with. That's an attraction.
Um, yeah, I agree. Um, escapism is like escapism is pretty important to people because because like people do that all the time, even if it's not action, if it's not like action heroes or movies or books, it's still like a hobby. It's still like a hobby they're doing is effectively escapism because it's something they're occupying their time with.
Do you not think gaming is the same thing?
I,
That's a more instant gratification
I
than
think
that.
gaming is like pretty much the same because when you're gaming, you don't have to concern yourself about who's sick or who's dying or who's like hurting right now. You only have to concern yourself with like what's going on the screen or what's going on or what you have to do at that moment, not what you have to think about.
Well, primarily it focuses your attention, and you have to have a certain clarity to be able to look at the screen, and you are in charge. So it's taking that thing I was talking about of enabling, it gives you the same power to decide what happens. You are the one that is now, like the doctor, having to coordinate everything to resolve the situation as a whole. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, it makes people think like well, it makes people think that they can do something um, and like and like in an indirect way, it also helps people like get a better image of themselves
Sure.
because because when you're gaming, um, most of the time you're like keeping yourself away from your problems, or when you're reading a story, or when you're or even if you're like writing something, that's like you now have something to do. You no longer have you well you should still be concerned about it, but you shouldn't let it distract you from what you are doing right now.
That's
And
true, yeah.
and that's what makes like escapism so like appealing to people because it also allows like because once you're done with what you're doing, then you have a clear head, and you can and you can get like a better image, you can get like a better perspective on something that's concerning you.
Well, you take gaming and you take superhero films. Again, I refer to Doctor Who. When that first started, 60 years ago nearly, the original brief was that the series was aimed at a family audience and it wanted to inform. So it wasn't quite educational. They had a brief that they would have historical stories, like you have the Doctor go and meet Marco Polo, or be in the French Revolution, or the Battle of Culloden in Scotland. It very quickly became apparent that hitting people with fact, when part of the brief was that you cannot alter history, those ideas were phased out. but the education side of it does still crop up today, of in a capacity that it's saying, here is how to relate to people, here is how to relate to situations, and that you can overcome bullying. One of the things that happened was with the 2005 series, the reboot, when they brought Rose in, Billie Piper's character. After about 2 weeks of broadcast, she started to get hundreds and hundreds of letters from little girls going, your strength has made me want to overcome my own predicament, whether they be bullied, whether they are being abused. It gave an empowerment to them. So, in a sense, what you were asking about, why do people want to watch things? There's a cathartic element to it that almost makes people want to say, I am, I can, and I will, because they've seen that character overcome it.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's the people again, going to Doctor Who, the role of the companion is always like some.
This is booked. The studio's booked.
I think we've got to stop.
Oh.
Yeah, sorry, this.
Yeah, it's okay. Where is okay? So what I was saying is that when people go and when people go and watch a show, wait, no, I was talking about Doctor Who. When people watch Doctor Who, they want the role of the companion is to be like an audience insert. So if the audience insert is like a strong character that has like the ability to overcome the issues, then the audience themselves feels empowered.
Absolutely, and the thing is, the companion is what in writing is called a journeyman. So the journey is focused on them. If you think about it, the Doctor comes and goes, right? The companion is the constant. That is who the audience go, that's somebody I can relate to. That's why Rose worked. And the new girl, Ruby Sunday, Millie, is a student, a science student who's got a day job working in a shop. So how much of a common denominator is that? How many people are students and have day jobs? The audience instantly goes, I can hook onto that. I can relate to how they are reacting. The old adage about Doctor Who is each story shows a different way of reacting to a desperately dangerous situation. And having that focal point to hook onto is one of the reasons why the program works.
Yeah, I think like part of why, not just Doctor Who, but like other series like games, comic books, they work because they help empower not just the people in the story. They help give the message of you don't have superpowers, or you don't have all this money, but you do have the ability to better yourself and make other lives better just by like small actions.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, and by providing that message to people, you're helping them get a better perspective on life and how to help people and how to go about your daily life.
I think a lot of it boils down to showing how choice can affect things. there's an episode in season 4 called Turn Left, where Donna makes a decision that's opposite to the way her reality went. So instead of turning right, she turns left, and it leads to a world where the Doctor dies. So all of the invasions and all of the stories you've seen in that series subsequently have terrible impact on the Earth and on Britain. Her family end up as refugees. Buckingham Palace is destroyed because the Titanic actually crashes into it. The Arachnos spacecraft actually destroys a load of buildings in London. Everything tumbles. So that shows that for every action there's an opposite reaction. And it is informative emotionally to her, and the biggest reactions came from that story.
Yeah, and it is Turn Left is a really good story because you constantly because I think having Donna Noble in that position is good, because throughout the show she's always like, I'm no special, I'm no special person. I'm not that good at this. She's constantly downplaying herself, which is what people do in their day-to-day life. They downplay themselves because they don't have like that level of confidence to actively big themselves up. It's not everyone, but there's always going to be like some people everywhere, even like groups, even like confident people still second guess themselves.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
And I think, there are, in that series, there are big questions that come up. There's an episode called Midnight, where there's an alien species that possesses one of the characters, and she starts to mimic the Doctor. So as he speaks, she repeats what he says. And then it evolves, so she speaks exactly the same and uses the same dialogue that he does at the same moment. And then she starts predicting what he's going to say. So there's a question there of your own reality being knocked sideways. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah. It's like, yeah, I think that episode does a really good job of showing that the Doctor's not always going to be able to make people better, because the people in that episode are, quite frankly, pretty bad.
Yeah, they're horrendous.
Yeah. Like, there's only one or two likable characters besides the Doctor there.
But it shows that human instinct of turning on what they do not understand.
Yeah, it's like people fear what they don't understand. Like, it's not just in Doctor Who. In Marvel Comics, most of the reason that mutants are persecuted is not because they've done anything. Well, mutants do. There are a group of mutants that do something wrong, but they were birthed because like people instinctively fear mutants because they don't know what they are. They don't understand them.
Well, yeah. I mean, take the X-Men. With that, they're basically hiding. And Professor X, his job is to find these mutants and educate them and protect them. And the reason everybody turns against them is because they don't understand, and there's not a willingness to accept that people can be different. So there's a huge metaphor there.
Yeah, and like, it is the same with real life, because racism, sexism, xenophobia, stuff like that is birthed because people don't understand the other thing. and don't understand the other person, the other thing, the other concept, because it's different to their reality.
Well, there's a thought that, say for example, you take the Loch Ness monster, a monster, whether it exists or not, that's not what I'm talking about. If they found it, the common belief is the first thing that would happen is they'd kill it and cut it up to see what makes it tick.
Yeah.
They wouldn't allow it to exist because they don't accept or understand that it could exist. And you boil that down and you've got a very, very pertinent point. It's exactly the same as some of those superhero films. How many people, I think it's The Dark Knight Rises, they turn against Batman and he's being hunted down. That's because it took one thing to trigger a series of events where he becomes the villain, he becomes misunderstood, and that natural instinct is to stop it, whether it be kill it, put it in prison, I don't want to know, put it over there, take it out of my eyesight. That mentality, you can see that as the basis of so many figures in heroic literature, if you like.
Yeah, like most of the time when, because I think that putting real life events in fictional stories, or like real life motivations for something in fictional stories is good, because it puts like that scenario in perspective, but it also shows like this can be resolved if, or in other cases it shows that this can't be resolved in our world, but in this fictional story it can be resolved.
Oh, sure. I mean, take Superman Lives? Is it no, what was the first Henry Cavill one?
I think it was Man of Steel.
Man of Steel, that's it. Man of Steel, at the end, General Zod and Superman are smashing the city to bits, fighting until Superman breaks his neck. That's another debate. The consequences, quite cleverly, are addressed in Batman vs Superman, because the story there, you see the same battle, but on the ground Bruce Wayne is running around trying to save people as the buildings collapse. So it's the whole thing of consequences, and everybody turns against Superman as a result.
Yeah. I could go on about why Man of Steel was bad, but that's already been done, and that's not related to this. But I think
Man of Steel has many, many problems.
Yeah.
From a story point of view, from a production point of view, to how it looks. It's contrived, and it's almost preaching. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, which is also why I think that people aren't drawn to like the DC films, because while there are fans of the DC films, the general public is always like DC is too dark and depressing to actually get into.
Yeah.
Which is like DC can be dark and depressing. Anything can be dark and depressing as long as there's because think of Zack Snyder. He said that if you think that your hero is innocent of all this like horrible stuff and you're living in a dream world, and I'm thinking that's kind of the point of superhero fiction, because it is a dream world, and like we shouldn't be concerned about what would actually happen.
Well, if you look at the comics, certainly when I was growing up and I was reading DC comics in the 70s and into the 80s, they were lurid They were very colourful. Each issue of Batman, for example, didn't have any real continuity. It was like they were focusing on creating the craziest villains they could think up, and they were self-contained stories. It wasn't until The Dark Knight Returns, when Frank Miller got hold of it, that there was any sense of consequence, because that was an old, embittered Batman coming out of retirement to try and stop Superman. To be honest, I think they've made a huge mistake not making that as a film. But everything changed from that point onwards, and there was a thing called The Killing Joke, where the Joker kills Batgirl. Well, he doesn't kill her, he breaks her back.
Yeah.
And the Joker gets killed at the end. You have to ask yourself, what caused that turn of events? And I think it was pretty much this next generation of writers coming through, like Frank Miller, like Alan Moore, that looked at it and went, no, let's go dark. And the mid-80s were extraordinary for the stuff that was coming out. The Watchmen, when that came out, revolutionized the comic industry.
Yeah, it's like, I think that making comics dark and covering really dark topics, that on its own is not a bad thing, because people will still like that. People will still like, this is a really brutal story, like say The Walking Dead, because people really like that. But when you there's a line. You can have a dark story, but in my eyes, there always has to be like a resolution, a sign that something can be better. Because if there isn't, then it's just saying this sucks, and like everything sucks.
Oh, completely. I mean, America was slightly slower to catch up on that, because, if I get my dates right, something like 1978, 2000 AD came out, and there was Judge Dredd, and Judge Dredd killed people. It was a bloodbath in that comic, but it was aimed at kids, 11, 12-year-olds. So that generation grew up looking at that. There were the ABC Warriors, there was Hammerhead and Rojaws, I think, who were robot assassins. There were all sorts of extraordinary science fiction tales coming out. And nothing had been seen like that before, not as accessible. Sure, there were things like Heavy Metal magazine that were doing esoteric sci-fi, but nothing had that commercial impact until then. There was immediately a rip-off of 2000 AD that came called Star-Lord, which people don't remember now, but it was equally as brutal. But it took a while for stories that complicated and that savage to be done by DC, let alone Marvel. Marvel was way behind.
Yeah. The way I see it, if a story there's like, you can have a really dark story, you can make it and you can make it appealing to people. You can make it enjoyable. But then like on the other end, you can have a really light story and people will really like it. But people don't like extremes of one side. Because if a story is too dark and too depressing, people won't like that. If a story is like too lighthearted, people won't like that. Because either way, there's no immersion, there's no escapism in that.
I think what's happened as an evolution